So here we are, 100 days on, we're all still alive, and the question is, what are proving to be the tricky GDPR issues in practice for people who are involved in the HR side of things? So Olivia, you've been in the front line here. What would you say are the thorniest issues that have been coming up?
Well, I think the key issue from an HR perspective, which has received a lot of press attention, has been around the issue of consent.
Yeah.
And I'd say a lot of HR clients are on board in terms of taking those consent provisions out of contracts of employment, so ticking that box.
So they're okay with the basics?
So with the basics, so that's job done. However, what we are seeing is still an overuse, over-reliance on consent provisions in the employment context. So I think it's a case of old habits die hard. So whilst they've come out of the contracts of employment, sometimes they sit in other documents that are issued at the start of the employment relationship. So the whole issue of consent is still intrinsically wrapped up in the acceptance of the job offer. And
this is coming back to this point about for consent to be valid under GDPR, it's got to be freely given. They've got to have had a real alternative.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's whilst some HR clients think, okay, we've got a separate consent provision, when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, it's not quite dotting the I's and crossing the T's. For example, it may not contain the right to withdraw consent. The other common approach we're seeing is consent being relied upon as a bit of a fallback in circumstances where actually they don't need to. So I think all of the exemptions to the Data Protection Act, when you don't need to rely on consent, have actually had a raw deal as far as the press is concerned, because there hasn't been that much attention or focus on them. So we're finding that some clients aren't aware that, for example, you don't need to rely on consent when you are processing, for example, data relating to race or ethnicity for equal opportunities monitoring, processing health data to assess the working capacity of an employee. So really we are now working with clients trying to explain and help them to understand when they need to use consent and when they don't.
Yeah. And Emma, if I could just bring you in, because I know that working out of one of our US offices, you're helping a lot of our US clients who've got more of a sort of pan-European take on this. And you know, how are you finding the issues are for them?
Yeah, I think with that, it's been a real learning curve for a lot of companies to really get to grips with the fact that one size doesn't fit at all, although it's intended to harmonise things. And actually Olivia just mentioned some of these exemptions under GDPR, and they are where you do have to fall back on the local member state law. So in relation to diversity monitoring, for example, in France, what you can do will be much more restrictive than the position in the UK.
It is, I think though, Tamara, it is a case of obviously trying to be legally compliant, but also adopting a pragmatic and commercial approach to, say, issues such as retention that differ on a pan-European basis.
So this is data retention. How long can we keep records for?
Yes. Yes. But obviously for businesses, they need something that's manageable. So it's just not practical to have all these different retention periods flying around for different European jurisdictions. So it's a case of getting a balance between, well, what is legally compliant, but also what works for the business. So we're talking through clients how to achieve that. Yeah.
So there's been a lot in the press recently about the so-called gig economy. There's been a lot of high-profile cases involving people like Deliveroo, Uber, status of their workers there. But what are the implications for GDPR? Because it does have implications for that too, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually contractors has been one of those areas that some companies haven't really got to grips with yet. And there is a need to be looking at that on two fronts. So firstly, you know, what is that contractor, if we're thinking about a contractor, so someone who's not actually an employee of the business, what is their role? And it may be that they are themselves a data processor or a data controller, so you need to make sure that your agreement with that person is GDPR compliant. And then the second aspect, and I think this in particular is something that is being overlooked, is that actually you might be processing that person's personal data. So they themselves have privacy rights, and you need to be giving that transparency, the privacy notice information to them.
And that's an area where we are seeing things change and develop as we go past the May the 25th deadline. So initially it was very much focusing on getting in place a staff privacy notice. So this sort of one size fits all applies to employees, contractors, agency workers, applies at the point of recruitment and throughout the employment relationship. But the feedback from a lot of our clients is actually going forwards, we'd like something that's more tailored and specific to the different categories of workers and also the different stages in the employment relationships.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, interesting.